Becoming a landlord wasn't really all it was cracked up to be. I had thought, foolishly, I realize now, that it would be quite as simple as buying a property, making it livable, and renting it out to quiet, responsible people who would cause no problems and pay me on time. Hey, 2 out of 3 ain't bad, right? It didn't start out badly. My first rental was a cute little 2-bedroom cottage on a dead-end street that I fixed up with the help of my mom and brother. It was in pretty good shape to begin with, so all it really took was a few fresh coats of paint, some updated appliances, and some new curtains to give it that homey touch. A pair of elderly, widowed sisters ended up living in it, and I couldn't have asked for better tenants. They were both very sharp-witted, always had the rent check ready on the first of the month, and kept me supplied with all the baked goods a woman could ever want. What I didn't realize was that these two were an exception rather than the rule. With a pair of rose-colored glasses fixed firmly over my eyes, I set out to find a second property to expand my rental empire. I found it in the form of a 3-bedroom, 2-bath New England-style home. It needed more TLC than the cottage, some that would require professional attention, but the foundation and structure were solid, and the area it was in was up and coming, so I just couldn't pass it up. It was ready just 4 months later, and only took a week to fill. Here is where I admit that I am not always the best judge of character, and kind of have a thing for an underdog. Henry really seemed like a nice guy. He was upfront about his past legal issues and how he'd struggled with drinking, but assured me he was now sober and working a steady job so he could get custody of his kids again. That was why he needed a 3-bedroom house, so he had a place for his young sons to stay once they started visiting. I ate it up, hook, line, and sinker, and handed over a key. The first month went by smoothly, the second too, but by the third, the excuses started. His paycheck was late, so he'd need a little more time on his rent. The kids were sick, so he was a little bit tight on money. His car broke down, he needed to pay for that first so he could get work. I tried to be understanding, the poor guy was clearly having a hard time. But the bills were starting to put a strain on my own finances, and after 3 months of little to no rent paid, I had to put my foot down. I attempted to call him a few times, but his phone went straight to voicemail, so I decided to confront him in person. I called my brother to let him know where I'd be and why, in case anything happened. I was naive, not stupid, and drove to the property. As soon as I pulled up, my rose-colored glasses started to crack. The front lawn had been allowed to overgrow and the garage door was left open, revealing piles of boxes and unsorted clutter that appeared to have just been tossed and left on the ground. I was nervous as I approached the front door. I hated confrontation and wasn't sure what I'd even say to Henry. I ran over a few scenarios in my head while I knocked and waited for him to answer. None of them ended well. I heard shuffling inside and the door cracked open. Henry stared blearily out at me. Slack jaw and eyes only half open. The stench of booze wafted off him like bad cologne. "What you want?" he snapped, as I stood there, stammering. "Hi, Henry, I just came to see about your rent." "Don't got it," he said. "Well, it's been a while since you last paid." "Take it up with my bitch of an ex. She's the one who gets all my money." He slammed the door in my face, the rose-colored glasses shattered. I soon found out that the eviction process is messy, complicated, and long. In my area, it doesn't give favor to the landlord. At all. In the end, I was able to give Henry the boot, but not before he completely trashed the house. More time and money were sunk into repairing the damage he'd caused, and I vowed I would be more careful picking my next tenant. Pauline and Craig were a nice young couple looking to start a family. They lasted just 2 months before they up and left in the middle of the night. Apparently, Craig was having issues with his dealer and needed to make a quick getaway. I only found this out when Pauline had the courtesy to call and say they wouldn't be coming back. Celine was a middle-aged schoolteacher. She wasn't a bad tenant overall, just very demanding. It seemed like I was getting phone calls every day with some new complaint or request. Then her lease ran out at the end of the year. I opted not to renew. Once Celine was gone, I seriously considered selling the house. The extra income it provided was nice, but I wasn't sure the headache it was causing was worth it. After crunching numbers and talking to a couple realtors, it became pretty apparent that if I wanted to sell, I'd have to do it at a loss. It just wasn't a good time to try and unload a house. Grudgingly, I listed it as being available for rent and braced myself for the next terrible tenant. I didn't have to wait long. I received a call from a hopeful-sounding woman the next day. "Hi, is this Macy?" "Yes," I said. "My name's Veronica. I found your ad online for the house on Colonial Street. I'm looking for a place to rent in that area and the pictures looked really nice." "Great. Were you interested in seeing it?" "Yeah, I'm available this afternoon if you are." We set up a time to meet and I hung up with a groan. She sounded young and, thus far, I hadn't had the best experiences with younger people. To be fair though, I had had the best experiences with any people in that house. I decided to give her the benefit of the doubt, and when the appointment time came, I was standing in the driveway to meet her. I'd been right about her being young. She couldn't have been more than 25, but she dressed smartly and drove a sensible, clean car, both good signs. She asked a few questions while we walked through the house, pointed out things she likes, and generally seemed interested in the place. "Are you moving out here for a job?" I asked conversationally, a gentle pry to find out her employment status. "No," she said. "I grew up here. I'm moving back to be closer to my family." "What do you do?" A little less gentle this time. "I'm a remote IT help desk associate. I work from home." That sounded pretty stable. "And you don't think the rent will be a problem for you?" "No, not at all. It's actually cheaper than my apartment in the city." "Perfect." We walked back out to the front porch, and Veronica confirmed her interest. I emailed her the lease that night, she signed it and sent it back, and I prayed that I wasn't making yet another mistake. Veronica hadn't been in the house for more than a couple days when my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered anyway. "I'm calling for Macy McPherson," an unfamiliar man's voice said. "This is Macy." "I'm sorry to bother you, ma'am, but I'm calling about my daughter, Veronica. I understand she's living in your house." "What's this about?" I asked nervously. "Please don't be another addict. Please don't spring a ton of drama on me."
"Veronica isn't well," he said. "She has a history of moving around and getting into trouble. I'm trying to get her to come back home so I can get some help for her. But she isn't listening. She shouldn't be left on her own. She could damage your house or hurt herself, or you."
So much for no drama. That's, is she ill?
"Yes. I'm planning to come down tomorrow to get her, but I wanted to warn you before she has a chance to do anything."
"Oh, well, thank you. I'm sorry. What's your name?"
"Kurt."
"Thank you, Kurt. I'll go over in the morning to check on her."
"Do me a favor. Don't tell her I'm coming. It would just upset her and she'd try to run. She doesn't think she's ill and resists treatment. It's part of the disease."
After we'd hung up, I paced restlessly through my house, my anxiety on the rise. I could just picture her lighting small fires all over the place, punching holes in the wall, tearing up floorboards. In my head, she had become less a person and more of a caricature of an insane cartoon. "Okay, let's not get ahead of ourselves," I said aloud. "You don't even know if that was her dad, but why would someone make that up?" And he sounded so serious. I checked my clock and decided that 6 p.m. was still early enough for me to swing by. I had to give her her copy of the lease anyway. I grabbed the manila envelope with the paperwork in my purse and hurried out to the car. She was home when I arrived, which made me breathe a sigh of relief. As I stepped up to the front door, I could hear music playing from somewhere within, the loud kind of music with screamers instead of singers. I rang the doorbell 3 times before the music went silent, and then a 4th before Veronica answered. She was dressed in dirty overalls and a ratty tee. Her long hair tied up in a sloppy bun at the back of her head. Sweat, dirt, and dust covered her face. She was surprised to see me, and I couldn't hide my own concerned frown at her appearance. Hi," she said. "Are you working on something?" I wanted to push past her and charge inside and take a look around, but I was also afraid of being trapped in there with an unhinged, angry person. "Putting together furniture and cleaning out the basement," she smiled sheepishly. "I didn't know you were coming by, otherwise I'd have cleaned up." No problem. I should have called first." Her story was plausible, I supposed, but the way she kept the door mostly closed and the flickering of her eyes made it hard to believe her. "I was just dropping off your copy of the lease." "Thanks." She took it from me, and I couldn't help but notice the filth caked under her nails. She must have caught my look because she withdrew her arm quickly. "Anything else?" "Yeah," I said, trying to think quickly. "Emergency contact. Do you have one? Your dad or something?" "My sister. I thought I filled that out on the form." "Oh, maybe I missed it." "Maybe." She was looking at me strangely, like I was the crazy one, and I tried to smile. "Do you mind if I come in just for a minute?" Her behavior, the state she was in, it was too much. I had to make sure the house was still in one piece. "I do, actually. I'm in the middle of stuff. It's a mess in here." "That's what I'm worried about," I said bluntly. "Sorry, but no." Before I could react, she closed the door, and I heard the lock click. "Bitch," I muttered. I remained on the doorstep, weighing my options carefully. Yes, the lease said I had to provide 24 hours notice before I entered. It would technically be a breach of contract for me to go in without that notice, but she was clearly doing something she shouldn't have been. Why else would she have been so evasive? I had to be covered by probable cause or something. But I wasn't brave enough, or assertive enough to force my way in. I turned on my heel and stomped back to the car, determined to send her a strongly worded text when I got home about how I'll be visiting in the next day whether she liked it or not. She didn't respond, but I didn't really expect her to. At 3 a.m., I was pulled from a deep sleep by the sound of someone pounding at my front door. Usually I wouldn't have gone to see who it was and just called the cops. A woman living in the city can't be too careful, right? But the red and blue flashing lights visible through my bedroom curtains told me that really wouldn't be necessary. I grabbed my robe and rushed to the front door, fearing the worst.
"We're looking for Macy McPherson," one of the officers said when I opened the door.
"That's me," I said, my fear turning my voice to a squeak.
"We need you to come with us, ma'am.
Can I ask why?"
A detective is waiting at the station to explain everything."
They allowed me to change quickly and then escorted me to their car, where I was made to ride in the back seat. There's something especially excruciating about waiting in a police station. It's cold and uncomfortable, and no one will answer your questions, even if you haven't done anything. I was made to sit in a lobby for over an hour until a bearded gentleman in plain clothes came to call on me. He took me down a long hall and into a small bare room. We sat across the table from one another, a closed file between us.
"I'm Detective Howard. I'm just going to be asking you a few questions. I'm sorry you've had to come down here at this hour,"
he said with a sympathetic smile. "Do you know why you're here?" I shook my head slowly.
"Do you know Veronica Pierce?"
"She's my tenant." "We received a call from her earlier tonight saying she found a body in your basement." Stunned, I shook my head again, faster this time. It was amazing how quickly the panic started to set in, even though I knew I'd done nothing wrong. She's gotta be wrong."
"First, take a deep breath. You feel better? Okay? Now, tell me when you bought the house."
"A few years ago."
"And did you do any work on it?"
"Upstairs, yeah."
"And the basement?"
No, it was solid. Didn't need anything done." "Are you sure she's telling the truth? I heard from her father earlier."
"Kurt Pierce?"
"Yeah, he told me she's sick. She's got mental health issues."
"Okay, anything else?"
"Just that I didn't want her in my house. He wanted me to kick her out so he could get her help."
"I see."
His expression was neutral, unreadable. So maybe she's lying?"
"I wish that were the case, ma'am. Can you tell me anything else?"
"There's really a body?" I slumped in my chair, my hands wringing.
"I'm afraid so."
"Whose?"
"We're not sure yet."
"How did you find it?" He shrugged.
"That's what we're still trying to find out."
Thanks to Veronica, the investigation was not a terribly long one. 15 years beforehand, her mother, Nadia, had walked out on the family just after Christmas. At least, that's what her father had said. Veronica, then only 10, hadn't believed him. While Kurt was a well-liked man for a popular home builder, and viewed as a pillar of the community, he was an abusive, short-tempered man behind closed doors. Nadia had always protected their daughters from him. If she was going to leave, she would have taken them with her. The cops felt sorry for Kurt, a now single father raising 2 young girls, and did their best to keep him out of the spotlight. No one had had any reason to believe that Kurt had been involved. And by all accounts, he was a good, hard-working man who loved his family, and many of them had grown up with him. The fact that he had been remodeling his basement for the last year never even came up. When Veronica confronted Kurt as a teen, he'd beaten her and told her there was plenty of room in the basement for another mouthy bitch. Kurt must have realized his slip-up because for the rest of the time they lived there, he'd tell anyone who would listen about his poor delusional daughter, broken by her mother's abandonment.
"She blames me," he'd cry. "She thinks I made her mother go away."
Kurt moved the family away when Veronica was 16, and every day since she'd been planning her return. She kept a constant eye on the house, waiting for it to become available. She viewed it as extremely lucky when she saw that I happened to be renting the place out. After that, all it took was some persistence, a sledgehammer, and time. Kurt heard through the grapevine that Veronica was back, and he scrambled to find my contact information. But his attempt to scare me into kicking her out hadn't come soon enough. She found her mother's long, decayed body, wrapped in old sheets and insulation, in the far corner of the basement, behind a thick layer of bricks. I gave up the landlord gig not long after Kurt was arrested and the house was seized as a crime scene. Literal skeletons in the closet, or in my case, the basement floor, were a bit too much for me. Hey everybody, I hope you enjoyed this video. I thought the story was really interesting. I thought it was really cool how it constantly switched between different tenants. So you always really never knew what was going on. You're like, is it going to be about this person? Is it going to be about that person? This is kind of spooky. What's going to happen? I thought that aspect of the story was really cool. I loved reading it. I hope you enjoyed listening to it. If you did, thumbs up, subscribe for more content, and I'll see you in the future. Until next time, everybody.